So what do you think the best decade of your life is living in Hawaii? That's the question I've been asking myself recently, because as my boys are getting older and they're on track to grow up in Hawaii, I've thought about what that means to grow up and transition from decade to decade to decade. So that's what I want to talk about in this video, from growing up small kid time to then having those teenage and college years, and then those young professional adult years, as well as those prime working years in your 40s. And as I talk about each of these decades, I'm hoping that it's somewhat relatable, whether or not you grew up or lived in Hawaii, because I'd like to think that there's some universal parts of just growing up and getting older that can apply to any place, really. But for this video, I want to talk about it in the context of living in Hawaii. And no, life in your 20s, not the best years of your life here in Hawaii. At least that's what I found so far. By the way, we're headed to Aloha Tower, which you can't really see behind this building, but it's there. So let's talk about growing up here in Hawaii, those first 10 years, small kid time, Hanabata days, whatever you want to call it. I really think that it's a privilege to grow up here in Hawaii. And I use that word specifically, privilege, because it was such an amazing time, and a time that I look back fondly on. Oh, the light's finally gonna change. Let's go. Oh, here we go. As we navigate. Oh, whoa, whoa, shaky. Okay, we made it. Looking back at childhood, that's a time where you get to try out those favorite Hawaii foods that you'll probably end up growing up with for the rest of your life, like spam musubi and Portuguese sausage, eggs and rice. It's also when you pick up pigeon. It's also when you spend a lot of time with grandma, grandpa, or aunties and uncles. And back then, as a kid, most of your time is in school. For me, I didn't go to school in my local neighborhood. I went to school in town or further away, so I didn't really get to go to school with the kids who lived around me. It's one of the things that I definitely think I missed out on, because I think there's something to that when your neighbors or, you know, the kids down the street, you guys all see each other at school as well. And those early years were filled with a lot of sports, and I'm really thankful to have been able to play golf as much as we did and travel and just spent a lot of time with my dad. And I think that's what I look back fondly on. Not really the accomplishments of whatever I shot or the tournament results, but more about how much time I got to spend with my dad, with my brother, with my mom whenever we would go out. And that's what I remember now 30 plus years later. And as I raise my kids, I have to remember that if they do sports or activities, unless I really want to push them to be some kind of savant or some once in a generation talent, I'm really there just to expose them to different things and to just have fun, to be there, to try new activities, and that should be enough. Because I really don't want to be one of those parents that pushes their kids into competitive sports. I know the benefits of competing at the top level. I've been there, I've done that. I know the character that can be built when you work that hard. But looking back now, I don't want to be one of those parents that tries to live vicariously through my kid. That's not something that I'm interested in, and I don't want to put that kind of pressure on them, because I want them to love whatever activities that they do. And also, chances are they're not going to be a professional at whatever it is they do, and it's really those life skills that I'm looking for them to develop. And looking back, growing up here in Hawaii, it's just about fun. It's about having a good time and knowing that you're growing up in a loving family. So now let's move on to those teenage years to early college. That decade is all about having fun with your friends. I look back fondly on those years because most of my time was with my friends. And it's also the reason why, as a parent, I'm trying to focus on the first 10 years, because I know, like, if my kids are anything like me, after those first 10 years, they just want to go hang out with their friends all the time. I mean, we used to go to the mall a lot. We used to go hang out at Stadium Park after school. Looking back, that was the focus of my life, it seemed. Calling each other and talking, and then eventually like texting and things. But that was pretty much my whole life back then. Understandably, I think that's the experience that a lot of people have, where they just gravitate away from maybe their family time and more towards just friends. Hey, bud, thanks for hanging out with me. I also want to mention that these were the years that I transitioned from private school to public school, and just to share my experience on how that went. It was pretty hard. I didn't realize how sheltered I was in private school, because when I went to public school, these kids, to me, they just seemed so rough and so like dangerous. You know, I remember I would walk from Washington Middle School to Macaulay Library to wait for my dad after work, so I could be picked up after he finished work. And that walk on King Street, I used to be scared of it every single day. I don't know, for some reason I just thought that there'd be bullies around every corner and that they were gonna beat me up. Of course that never happened, but I was just like really scared because I had heard all these stories about how rough, you know, public school kids were. Sure, there are some problem kids, but for the most part the kids are just basically the same. And it's also during this decade that I went away to college on the mainland. That was, boy, that was one of the biggest changes of my life, and it really made me grow up. I remember when I first went to Colorado, I got homesick the second day I was there. I remember I was sitting in this subway with my mom because she went up to help me move into the dorm, and I was in subway and I was sitting across from her at the table, and I just started to cry because I wanted to go home. I was so sick of Colorado and being on the mainland and the weather and the smell. If you know northern Colorado, you know what I'm talking about. The smell, it just, everything, it just got to me. And I asked my mom, can I please go home? I want to leave right now. And my mom said no, and that was it. I was stuck. Of course, I'm glad she said that, and I had a wonderful time in northern Colorado and the mainland in general. I had to grow up a lot on my own because as a local boy growing up here, I'd never really left Hawaii for any significant amount of time. I took a couple of trips, but it was really not much. And so that was the first time that I was on the mainland, living on my own by myself. I had to meet people and I had to just navigate the college scene, which is really hard. People are definitely not equipped for that. They have to kind of learn on the go. And that was a real big grown-up experience for me, and something that I would encourage all Hawaii kids to try at least one time. Go to the mainland for a while, experience life there, whether you're in school or not, just to really like rough it. And when you come back, things will be different. But those years were filled with a lot of fun. A lot of hanging out with friends when I would come home during Christmas or summer break, a lot of playing volleyball and basketball late at night with them. And of course, afterwards, we all go hang out at Zippy's. Those were some real bonding nights. We could hang out every single night to like 11, 12, 1 o'clock at night. And now, as someone who likes to go to bed by 8 or 9 p.m., I look at that, I'm like, how did I even stay up that late? But I did, and I had a good time. So those are some good years. Definitely some wild years, but some good years growing up here. And there is Aloha Tower. Never been up there, but I'm sure it's a really nice view. Now let's talk about your 20s here in Hawaii. Now I'll admit that I was absent for a lot of my 20s here because I was on the mainland in college, and also I was working and I thought my life would be there. But I did move back in my 20s, so I do have I guess maybe a unique perspective. But I want to talk about the 20s because I think this is a big decade in people's lives when it comes to Hawaii. I think a lot of big changes happen where they're young 20s, they want to come here, maybe either for college or they want to just move here right after college. And I think this is a prime decade for a lot of people to come to Hawaii. It's also a time when people may consider leaving Hawaii because if you grew up here and things are getting too tough, you realize, well, I'm never going to be able to buy a home, or the struggle is too real. And so now is that chance to go, possibly before you have kids, or even if you already have kids, they're only going to be young, so the move won't be as impactful. By the way, what is going on over here? Like the tables and stuff. But I noticed during my 20s when I would come back to Hawaii, I felt like this weird, I don't know, it's not really imposter syndrome. It was just a very unusual feeling because having grown up here and then lived a long time away, each time I would come back to Hawaii to visit, I felt like I wanted to get back to the mainland even faster. Like if I was coming home for like, let's say a couple of months, I just couldn't wait to get back to the mainland. Even though I had great times with my friends, my life seemed to be elsewhere. Oh, as we enter the tower, how's the exposure? Hopefully not too bad. But yeah, I felt like every time I came back to Hawaii, I just couldn't wait to get back to the mainland. Anybody else can relate to that? But in my 20s is when I decided to move back, in my late 20s. So I wanted to kind of highlight what that means, because I think that's important and maybe somewhat relatable for other people who may be thinking about coming back to Hawaii. It's around that time that you may be thinking, I wonder if I should consider going back. Now, when I moved back in my 20s, it was a tough decision to do, but I just noticed that my parents were starting to get a little bit older, and that was really a big reason why I wanted to move back. And I remember trying to find a job here in Hawaii before coming back here, and I found some like random job that I didn't even think it was a real job. I thought it was just some like fake posting, but I thought, might as well apply. And wouldn't you know it, I actually got the job. At the time, I just thought it was a temporary job because I figured I was the least qualified of the 5 candidates, of the 5 of us who got the job like temporarily. And then at the end of like that season, it would be determined who would get like a permanent position. And I just assumed that I wouldn't get the job after that. And it was, a good learning experience, but that was pretty much the end of it. But in the end, I ended up getting the offer for the permanent position, which I thought was really amazing and very unexpected. I recently read this essay by Peter Drucker talking about what it means to be like a good employee. And in the essay, he goes through all the different qualifications and things, but at the end, he talks about character and integrity, and those being the intangible things that you really should be learning during those early years as you work. And so maybe that's why I was hired. I can't really say, but I'm really thankful that based on that job, I've been able to learn so much. And just on a little philosophical note, back in my 20s, I thought I knew everything about everything. And maybe some of that is still into my 30s now, but back then I thought I knew everything about everything. But the problem was I didn't have any life experience to back it up. And I think we see a lot of people in their 20s who are very loud and they have very strong opinions. And some of them are very, very insightful. But it's that passion of youth that I think looking back on, and older generations can look back on, that they're like, wow, so much passion, but not enough life experience yet. And it's that missing element of life experience that really builds on that life wisdom. And I'm seeing that now. I had a lot of vigor, I had a lot of passion in the things and opinions that I had back then, but I lacked experience and frankly, a lot of tact. And those are things that I had to learn coming into my 30s. That's just growing up. Because in your 20s, a lot of things just seem to be so simple, and it all works in your mind in theory, right? A lot of it's just theoretical at that point. But it's when you actually have to live and you work and you go through all of life's experiences that a lot of people commonly share, that you kind of get to test some of those philosophies and outlooks on life. And sometimes you realize maybe it doesn't work that way. And in my 20s, I was able to buy a place, and that was life-changing here, to be able to do that. And I'm very thankful and appreciative to have the opportunity to do that. I know it's not an easy thing to do here in Hawaii, but it is possible. And so if anyone asks me about trying to get a place here, I try to be encouraging and say, you know what, it is possible. It's hard and I have to make a lot of sacrifices, but it is possible. Even today, it's possible. And there are projects that are coming up that young people in their 20s can buy. Granted, you just gotta make sure that you save and stay disciplined. And in those 20s, I'm glad that I got to put what I learned to the test. All the things that my parents taught me growing up, I was able to actually see, okay, can I take care of myself? Can I buy my own food? Can I cook? Which I can't, but I tried. Can I pay my bills, and can I just manage a household and make sure I got all my things taken care of? Those are things that my parents tried to teach me growing up. And I really got to put them to the test during my 20s when I lived on the mainland as well as when I moved back. Just not living with them really helped me to grow up and learn all these wonderful life skills. Hey, bud. Yeah. Oh gosh, there's no path. I can't go up there? Oh my gosh, how do I get down? Looks like I'm gonna have to go down the stairs. Ka-donk. The shocks on this stroller. Oh, okay. We made it. All right, let's talk about the 30s now. This is the decade that I'm currently in. A lot of things that I wanted to do in my 20s, I was able to do them in my 30s, like get married and have a family and just develop professionally. I think at the time I wanted those things so fast. I wanted all those things right away, but now I can look back and say, you know what? It's actually probably a good thing that those things happened in my 30s, because I was able to kind of grow up a little bit more. Still growing up, but at least I could grow up a little bit more. And what was so great about my 30s was I was finally able to gain some experience, because I actually worked here now in Hawaii, and I had to pay regular taxes and deal with broken car and traffic and all these different things that I didn't have to so much in my 20s. And so by having that experience, now all those things that I used to think about life and my outlook on life could finally maybe be a little more grounded, because I had that experience. And it was in my 30s that I started this YouTube channel. Had I started it maybe in my 20s, it probably would be a totally different YouTube channel because of the things that I was going through at the time. But because I started it in my 30s and I was experiencing more of the real, I guess, hardships, maybe more relatable hardships and just everyday life things, that became the focus of this channel, which I'm rather proud of. I'm able to make videos on topics that I think people can relate to. And in my 30s, I'm more understanding of what's going on in the state. Prior to my 30s, I really didn't know what was happening in the state politically or economically or anything. Barely watched the news, barely knew anything about who our politicians were, because I was so busy having fun. But in my 30s, I started to pay attention a lot more. I watch the news, I keep up with what's going on, and I think that's a good thing, and probably a very common sort of change that happens to a lot of people. You just kind of start paying more attention, and yeah, now you start to care. And lastly, let's talk about the 40s. I know a lot of my audience is in their 30s to 40s, and I'm not there yet. But what I am looking forward to is my 40s, because those are my prime working years, according to what they say online. But it's also going to be the years that my boys grow up. And again, I'm looking at it like a 10-year time limit here, where I got maybe 10 good years, and then after that, it's going to start to get challenging with them. So I'm going to try to enjoy those 40s and that time that I have with my boys as they get older, as they grow up, as they develop their personalities, and really shape, I hope, to be into good young men who can then grow up to be adult men who have character and can take responsibility. I'm also going to try to focus on my health. I mean, maybe it's a little too late. I should probably start in my 30s so that in my 40s I don't have to work so hard. But I'm going to try to get more exercise, take care of my body, eat better, which is really hard in Hawaii because, I want to eat like everybody else, right? Plate lunch and spam musubi, but eventually I have to cut back on that because I know it's not going to be healthy for me in the long term. When I get older, I want to be able to eat what I want to eat. I don't want to have to diet when I'm in my 60s because I didn't take care of myself in my 30s and 40s. So I'm going to try. But I have noticed that it's hard to take care of yourself when you got kids. So it's going to take a little bit more effort. And so to close, again, I do want to bring us back to those 20s because I think those 20s is an important decade for a lot of people. Like that's the decade when people either are moving here from the mainland or elsewhere or are deciding to leave if they grew up here in Hawaii. And we hear about brain drain, right? Where the best and brightest locally just pick up and move. They go to the mainland and they never come back. And that's probably a whole topic for another video. But it does highlight the importance of those 20s and how hard it can be. I would encourage anyone who's in their 20s right now in Hawaii. Those are tough years, but if you can make it through those years, it's really going to set you up, I think, rather nicely for the rest of your life here. That's an important time to have fun, experience new things, but also to probably save a little bit of money because you're going to need it when you make those big decisions later in your 30s. If I didn't make those sacrifices in my 20s, there's no way that I would have been able to buy something in my late 20s and now enjoy that in my 30s. It just wouldn't have been possible. But it's been fun to look back on the different decades of my life here in Hawaii. 30s is definitely a time to grow up. It's a time when I have my kids now, and that's really been a big part of my life. It's not video games and other things like I used to. It's family time, and it's good. It's a good change for me because now it, I think, focuses more on some like long-term things. And besides, these are my kids. I love them. I also recognize that life is not guaranteed. I may not live to see my 40s. I hope I do, and well beyond those years, but I know that life's not guaranteed. But for the meantime, I'm going to try to enjoy whatever season that I'm currently in, and I hope that people can enjoy what season they're in, whether it's the struggling but fun 20s or maybe more maturing 30s or working 40s, or heck, even the retirement 60s. Hopefully they get to enjoy that. And I think that's important to remember living here, is it's hard sometimes, and there's that ebb and flow of difficult seasons, but for me it's still worth it. So thanks for watching, and aloha. Thanks, bud.